Republicans raised new questions about Hillary Clinton in the taped prison phone calls of Webster Hubbell. This on a day when Ken Starr compared a legal claim by President Clinton to Watergate. A winter of mild weather stokes a U.S. wildfire danger. And the Viagra phenomenon, what many people don't consider but should know about it.
This is the CBS Evening News. With Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. The President and Mrs. Clinton came under new and strategically aimed political fire today on two fronts. Republicans raised new questions about First Lady Hillary Clinton in selectively leaked tapes from the congressional leadership on Capitol Hill. Recordings of personal prison phone calls made by Mrs. Clinton's former law partner, Webster Hubbell. CBS's Phil Jones has our report on that. Phil?
Dan, prison-recorded phone conversations between Hubbell and his wife have raised questions about whether Mrs. Clinton might have overbilled legal clients. Hubbell talked from a prison telephone to his wife, Suzanne, while he was serving time on charges related to marking up or overcharging legal clients.
You didn't actually do that, did you? You didn't mark up time for the client, did you?
Yes, I did. So does every lawyer in the country.
That's an area that Hillary would be vulnerable.
Not if I do it.
Not unless she overbills by time, right?
No, that's not what I want to say, Susie, but we're on a recorded phone.
Mrs. Hubbell complained that Marcia Scott, a White House aide, was squeezing her to make sure Hubbell didn't do anything to jeopardize Mrs. Clinton, who also worked for the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock. He reassured his wife.
I won't raise those allegations that might open it up to Hillary, and you know that.
Today, Hubbell told CBS News the tapes implied no wrongdoing by Mrs. Clinton.
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because I know Mrs. Clinton. She never did anything wrong, and I know of no wrongdoing. I've said that all along. I'll continue to say that.
These phone conversations were obtained from the prison by the Republican-controlled House Oversight Committee, which claims there are numerous conversations which prove Hubbell isn't telling everything. For example, November 1996, Hubbell talked to his sister, who asked if he'd heard rumors that Hillary Clinton faced indictment.
They're putting all kinds of pressure on me, and I'm clamming up, and that's not making anybody happy.
House Republican investigators suspect Hubbell clammed up after getting hush money. According to their investigation, the same people who paid Hubbell $700,000 also gave the Democrats $4.5 million. Dan?
Phil, thanks. On another front, Special Prosecutor Ken Starr, who indicted and convicted Webb Hubbell and then indicted him again yesterday, today compared President Clinton's executive privilege claim to one made by President Nixon during the widespread criminal conspiracy that was Watergate. CBS White House correspondent Scott Pelley has new information on Starr's strategy with that move. Scott?
Dan, so far the president's lawyers have been very effective in putting the brakes on Ken Starr's obstruction of justice investigation. The White House is refusing to provide some testimony, citing executive privilege. Well, now we are beginning to get, for the first time, some sense of Starr's counterattack. CBS News has reviewed sealed court documents in which Starr begins to hammer away at the president's shield. At least two White House officials have declined to answer grand jury questions. They argue that any president, to do his duty, must be able to keep conversations private. But in the sealed motion to the court, Starr's prosecutors tell the judge, quote, obstruction of justice and intimidation of witnesses are criminal activities that fall well outside the scope of the president's official duties, no matter how broadly those duties are construed. Today, in a speech, Starr claimed the law is clear.
If the evidence is relevant to a criminal investigation or prosecution, it must be turned over.
Starr recalled Watergate and the executive privilege ruling that brought down a president. He quoted Watergate prosecutor Leon Jaworski.
First, Mr. Jaworski said, our Constitution works. And second, he wrote, no one, absolutely no one, is above the law.
Yesterday, Mr. Clinton said he'd like the arguments to be heard in public. His lawyers are asking the judge to unseal the motions.
So that you and the American people could evaluate the specific executive privilege issues and whether you believe they're valid or not.
Valid or not, the case is almost certainly headed to the Supreme Court. It was 24 years ago on this very day that Richard Nixon claimed executive privilege in a failed attempt to keep investigators away from the Watergate tapes. That case forms the basis of Ken Starr's argument now. Dan?
Scott Pelley at the White House. Far from the political storms of Washington, an El Nino firestorm, literally, is racing through parts of the American upper Midwest. The cause, all that balmy winter weather swept in by El Nino. It left a legacy of tender, dry conditions, and spring brought the spark. CBS's Bob McNamara is at wildfire ground zero in, of all places, Minnesota.
As wildfires race across the northern Minnesota timberland, the state today requested more firefighters from Arizona and New Mexico. The blazes are being driven by high winds and the driest conditions in a decade.
Last year at this time we'd had about 5 or 6 fires, and right now for the Brainerd area we're at about 57.
Already this year more than 1,500 fires have burned across northern Minnesota. It's not a crisis yet, but it could be when the tourist season brings campfires, charcoal grills, and perhaps carelessness to these tinder dry woods.
They had to foam this in order to get it out.
Sparks from Dave Erickson's chainsaw started a wildfire that destroyed a small barn and threatened a farmhouse before help arrived.
We used wet rags and what we could and tried to stop it, but we just couldn't get a handle on it at all.
It makes you wonder if you want to live here, you know.
Foresters say a mild El Nino winter of unusually light snow left the Minnesota woods with little spring moisture and prone to catch fire.
Normally you could bend these things and nothing would happen, but when this time of the year you can see how dry they are, and they just crumble up and they ignite immediately.
So far, nearly 40,000 acres have been charred, and the battle against the blazes is becoming a ground and air war.
Well, there's a pretty good fire coming where you turn north.
Spotters in the sky direct a fleet of both helicopters and slurry bombers to remote fires. And while ground crews are already here from as far as New Hampshire and Vermont, there's little help in the weather forecast.
We're going to need several days of good rain to get anything saturated to where it'll drop the fire danger down.
And that lack of rain has many here worried the fires of spring could be followed by a summer drought. Bob McNamara, CBS News, War Road, Minnesota.
In California, also because of El Nino, it was big sir, no sir, for the last 3 months until now. El Nino landslides have finally been cleared from the only road through one of this country's most scenic sites. Finally, again, you can get there from here. Still to come on the CBS Evening News, repentance from the head of the IRS. Wall Street's week on our Friday Market Watch. Cautions about taking the impotence pill, and who's to blame when live TV news coverage takes a sudden tragic turn.
He's come out. He is not on fire. One of his foot is on fire.
For most of this week, the head of the Internal Revenue Service felt like a punching bag as one witness after another told a Senate hearing of alleged outrageous abuses by IRS investigators. Today, Commissioner Charles Rosati got his chance in the witness chair, and he vowed the future will be different.
We simply must change the conditions that lead to the situations described by your witnesses. We have to help and provide better service to taxpayers who willingly comply with their obligations, and we have to have absolute respect for the rights of all taxpayers. I do want to tell the committee today that the abuse of even one taxpayer or one employee is one too many for me.
CBS's Bob Schieffer reports that next week the Senate is expected to take up legislation to overhaul the IRS and guarantee taxpayers' rights. The House has already approved its version of that. On our CBS Worldwide Market Watch, Americans' personal income rose again in March, but this time by just 0.3%, half the rate of the previous month. Europe is going ahead with a giant step toward economic unity, laying the basis for a common currency, the euro, as in euro-dollar. Finance ministers today designated 11 countries to join in the new monetary union. On Wall Street here, stocks ended their roller coaster week on the upside. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 83 points today to close the week with a gain of 82. For the year to date, the Dow is up more than 15.5%. Several Los Angeles television stations have been inundated today with viewer complaints about an incident yesterday on a Los Angeles freeway, broadcast live from TV helicopters. It's an incident that is raising anew questions about what television covers and how, and what viewers may or may not want to see. CBS's Sandra Hughes has our report.
Going to swing that around now.
It started as another freeway incident covered live on Los Angeles TV, a standoff with police. This one ended tragically and suddenly.
He may have just taken his own life.
In a city where every TV station has a helicopter, 6 local stations and 1 national cable station covered what turned out to be a horribly graphic suicide live. Here's what happened. The man unfurled a banner criticizing HMOs and set his truck on fire before taking out a rifle and shooting himself. 2 stations interrupted children's programming for the coverage. Montserrat Almaraz was outraged when she came home to find her daughter had watched the whole thing.
And she was so excited to tell me all about it. And she said, but you know what? I saw the whole thing, Mommy. I saw when this guy blew his brains with this rifle.
Within hours, stations were besieged by phone calls, faxes, and emails criticizing the coverage. Veteran LA anchorman Hal Fishman said hundreds of thousands of commuters were impacted, and he defended it as news.
It's horrific. It's unfortunate. But that's the world in which we live, and we acted responsibly in our coverage of that event.
Freeway chases, shoot-'em-ups, and police standoffs have become a staple of local TV, and critics say it's getting out of hand.
Now that we've seen a live suicide on television, what is the appetite going to be for now?
By last night, stations felt the need to address viewer concerns.
KTLA shares with its viewers their distress.
But as some stations are promising more restraint, any big changes in the way these stories get covered are probably not in the offing, especially after these ratings. During yesterday's coverage, some stations more than doubled their normal viewership. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Los Angeles.
We have an update for you tonight in the case of a man who allegedly told an internet support group that he had killed his 5-year-old daughter. In a North Dakota courtroom, Larry Foistad was freed on $100,000 bond after being charged with murder. His lawyer says Foistad will plead not guilty to starting a house fire in 1995 that killed his daughter. The fire was ruled an accident. In California, word today that Eldridge Cleaver has died. He was a controversial figure in changing times. In the turbulent 1960s, he was founder of the radical Black Panther Party. He fled the USA after a shootout with police. The same year, he published a best-selling book, Soul on Ice. By the 1980s, he renounced much of this and sought to be a Republican nominee for a U.S. Senate seat. Eldridge Cleaver was 62. Rare and risky heart surgery has paid off for a 20-year-old man in Houston. Guy Altman is recovering well after what amounts to a heart transplant using his own heart to remove this rare lemon-sized tumor that interfered with a heart valve with every beat. Doctors led by Michael J. Reardon and John Baldwin had to take out the man's heart, cut out the cancerous tumor, fix the heart damage, and re-implant it. Mission accomplished in 6 hours of surgery. Far less rare and getting more common every day is the rush on Viagra, the impotence cure in a pill. A drug industry survey today says 51% of patients are now receiving some reimbursement from their health insurance. But beyond the question of who pays is the larger issue, who should take it and who should not. So he sent CBS's Elizabeth Caledon out to find out.
It's everywhere. The tiny pill that can cure impotence has made a dazzling debut, capturing magazine covers, making headlines, and inspiring late-night comedians.
Top 10 side effects of the new impotence drug. It's Viagra.
We have an endorsement. But to the medical community, Viagra is no joke.
Now, I should tell you about possible side effects.
It's a serious drug that should only be prescribed to treat a serious sexual dysfunction. But many doctors say that's not what's happening.
We get hundreds of calls. And what is remarkable is that at least half of the calls are coming from men that think that they can just get this medication on the telephone. Well, you can't.
And there are good reasons they can't. Impotence is often an early warning sign of more serious diseases, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Simply treating the impotence with Viagra could mask bigger problems.
Are you taking any medicines?
None.
Viagra can also be dangerous in combination with other medications. Some antibiotics may adversely alter Viagra's effects. Taken with drugs such as nitroglycerin or sorbitrate, which treat heart conditions, Viagra could lower blood pressure to dangerous levels.
In the studies that were done on Viagra, 50% of the men who are on Viagra with these nitroglycerin-type medications literally passed out.
And another thing to be careful of, great expectations. Not all men who have taken Viagra find it's the wonder drug they had hoped for.
I was disappointed because of occurrence of substantial side effects and the fact that it did not produce the results that I was seeking.
As Viagra grows in popularity, perhaps it should carry a new warning label. Taking this drug does not mean taking it lightly. Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, New York.
Workers around the world marked May Day today, and in many cases, their demonstrations were accompanied by violence. In Leipzig, in eastern Germany, police used water cannon to disperse crowds of what they called left-wing protesters. The protesters were trying to disrupt a rally organized by neo-Nazi right-wing extremists. The White House today announced the site for President Clinton's upcoming ceremony on his visit to China next month. It'll be a controversial one, Beijing's Tiananmen Square. That's where pro-freedom and democracy students were slaughtered in 1989. A spokesman for the president said this, quote, "in no way signals we have forgotten what happened in Tiananmen Square," unquote. Emergency food flights have begun to arrive in southern Sudan, where civil war and drought have brought another round of famine. UN officials say 700,000 people in Sudan are on the verge of starvation. They appeal today for $66 million to pay for more airdrops. For most Americans, a job and a car go together like a horse and carriage. By the same token, no car often means no job. And for millions of Americans now under government pressure to get off welfare and go to work, that's no joke. In his travels this week, correspondent Harry Smith found a good story, a place where they found a way to help people get off the dole and on a roll.
The mechanics of chronic poverty can be as daunting as a complete engine overhaul. But at a gritty little auto repair shop in Burlington, Vermont, they've discovered the road from welfare to work can be pretty simple.
It's called the Good News Garage, a place where folks accustomed to plenty of bad news come to get their lives rolling again.
You hand someone a set of keys, the next day, the next hour, their life is transformed.
Garage manager Hal Colston realized the single biggest thing separating many welfare recipients and available jobs was a way to get to work. The solution? Sell them reliable transportation at an affordable price, say a couple $100.
Why should it be a privilege to have access to a car, a decent car at that?
The mechanics at Good News fix up donated cars. The donor gets a tax write-off, and someone like Kathy Jones gets a way to work. Kathy's a single mom who had been on welfare.
I'm very happy between work and a car. Those were my two goals in life, and I reached both of them.
She has her first full-time job, but she also has freedom and independence and a way to get her own aging mother to the store and to doctor's appointments.
It's a godsend. That's exactly what it is.
Pastor Rick New couldn't have said it better himself. He's a co-founder of the Garage and the reason the Lutheran Church has poured thousands of dollars into running it. They put more than 100 people on the road.
People just need a break. You know, we all wait for that break. And these brakes happen to have 4 wheels.
Fixing up some of these clunkers costs a fortune. Master mechanic John Van Sant says if he had better cars to work with, he could help a lot more people.
I'm trying to get more quality cars in here, but that's a little tough, you know. Beggars can't be choosers sometimes.
So the garage takes in retail work to help pay the bills, and at the same time runs a training program for mechanics and service riders. Kathy Verge is a welfare mom who has become so invaluable, she's been offered a full-time job.
It means I've gotten somewhere. I'm not going to end up sitting home forever.
Yep, if you want to get somewhere, sometimes all it takes is a ride. Harry Smith, CBS News, Burlington, Vermont.
And that's part of our world. This Sunday, Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation will look at abuses of the IRS and the new pressures on President Clinton. Now, here's Mike Wallace with a preview of 60 Minutes.
With a career like hers and a face like hers, what prompts her to say,
it completely screwed my head on backwards.
If you like Murphy Brown, you'll love Candace Bergen. But you may not feel the same way about Ken Starr after you see the lead story Sunday night on 60 Minutes.
For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Good night and have a great weekend.